When you think of Champagne Pol Roger, it's likely to conjure up thoughts of the royal family or Sir Winston Churchill, but these are important historical and also contemporary connections to what they consider to be the most British of champagne brands. But you're also likely to consider Pol as producing some of the most classical and elegant champagnes. Very few other Maisons apply such an exacting precision to the management of their production facilities, pressing and vinification processes as Pol Roger. The recent opening of a state-of-the-art production site is just the latest innovation in a long documented series of quality improvements that go to the heart of the Maison's mandate for producing some of the most pure and precise champagnes with huge aging potential. It was my pleasure to sit down with Pol Roger's Managing Director Laurent for this interview on the occasion of the Maison's 175th anniversary. So, Laurent, welcome. It's great to have you with us today.
Yes, thank you for welcoming me with champagne weather in Adelaide.
You brought it with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Look, Pol Roger is, in my mind, a truly classical Maison, and Pol is very much a Maison that celebrates the blend, quality, consistency, year in, year out, a medium-sized family-managed house with great attention to detail around fruit sourcing, long, slow, cool vinification, protective winemaking, and championing a very pure and fresh style and a champagne that's always designed to age. So there's no other Maison quite like it that I'm aware of. Can you talk us through some of the key decisions or non-negotiables at Pol Roger that goes into creating and maintaining your style?
It is indeed very important. I mean, if you want to keep the consistency, at some point you have to make no compromise, and you have to make no compromise on your non-vintage. And the Brut Reserve is probably the most difficult wine for us to produce, and it is always the first concern we have after harvest. Take a decision if we are going to have the possibility to make vintages and to make a Churchill, but we take that decision only if we can make sure that we can guarantee the quality of the non-vintage. And this wine is the DNA of the Maison. It is the flag of the Maison everywhere in more than 100 countries in the world. And it's very important for us to make sure that we will be able to have, thanks to the diversity of our sourcing, thanks to the preciseness of our winemaking, of the settling, the double settling at cold temperature, to be able to deliver a non-vintage, which is reflecting the quality of the Maison.
So I wanted to get on to some of the foundational stories around the Maison because they're really unique and they're fascinating, and a lot of that remains today. So Pol Roger has had a very long and strong history with the UK in particular, and today it remains your most important export destination. It seems that the focus on the UK was started right at the very beginning of Pol Roger's foundation because the Maison made a decidedly brut style of champagne that specifically met the palates of the British market. So what was so attractive back then to Pol Roger, the Maison's patriarch, about the UK?
I think the story of Pol Roger is a young man less than 18 years old when he started the Maison in 1849, 175 years ago, has been very good to produce champagne. And in fact, he did produce champagne for other Maisons at the beginning. And he had an agent in the UK who at some point has been telling him, sell the champagne under your name. I mean, you are producing outstanding champagne and you should do it for yourself. And that was in the UK. So most of the business at the beginning was in the UK. And through the UK, Pol Roger has been selling in Hong Kong, in America, in India, in most of the Commonwealth countries, and which were maybe not called Commonwealth at that time,
No.
but it was linked to England. And today it is our first market. We have our own team working, selling the champagne in the UK, but it does not represent more than 18% of our total production. So we are considered as one of the very British champagne brand. I mean, there are a few, but probably Boulanger and Pol Roger are probably the two, Polly and Bolly. They call Berry brother calls them Polly Bolly. And it's a very important market for us. We are attached to the royal warrant. In fact, still of the Queen, but we are waiting for news from the palace. We have not enough. I mean, we could sell a lot more champagne in the UK. So I think the fame of Pol Roger in the UK is more important than its volumes. But our Pol Roger portfolio, our company in the UK, is selling other wines because we need to feed the team, and they would love to get more allocation, but we cannot really grow. So we have not been growing too much. I mean, we are not meeting the demand. I think that's one of the reasons the brand has a strength in the UK. And at the same time, we have been developing a lot of sales in other markets. And there have been a lot of new markets in Europe, in east part of Europe, in Asia a little bit. China is not existing yet as a champagne market. India is not existing. And Australia has been, but we can talk about it later, but we have a very good distribution in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to be that heritage, having that strong connection with the UK has really opened up, I guess, that historical connection with Commonwealth nations, really, inspired that sort of, that wonderful international network that you currently have, and really reinforcing that, I guess, as you were putting it before, that you are one of the most British champagne labels out there.
The nickname of the Brit is a white foil. So, it's a British nickname, or Pol as a short name.
Yeah. So I want to also get on to Pol Roger's association with Sir Winston Churchill, which goes back to 1908. And Pol Roger's prestige cuvée, Sir Winston Churchill, is on the aspirational list for so many champagne lovers. But the details of the blend and the approach to winemaking is kept a pretty heavily guarded secret, with good reason, I guess. Although we do know that it is Pinot dominant, it does come exclusively from Grand Cru villages, stainless steel fermentation, full malolactic fermentation. So a lot of the tenets, a lot of the, I guess, philosophical, things that go into Pol Roger in general exist there. But can you talk us through the story behind the connection to Sir Winston? I know it's widely published, but there's probably a few people listening today who don't really understand that connection. Why did Sir Winston love Pol Roger so much? And how did the Maison decide on this particular style and this particular blend to represent him?
I think indeed, he was a big fan of the vintages of Pol Roger. Pol Roger was born in Haï. His two sons, Maurice and George Roger, they became Pol Roger after the death of their father. They did ask the French government to use the first name of their father as part of their last name. They were producing vintages. I mean, that was the beginning of Pol Roger, was mostly vintage, but a lot of champagne houses in the 19th century were producing vintage champagne. And as you said, as early as 1908, we have some tracts or some invoices from Randolph and Penn, which is now just Origny and Brooks in St. James in London, with an invoice of 1895 vintage to Winston Churchill. And that was among some other beverages, maybe some spirit. But he was drinking, I think he has been drinking several brands in the early stage. Pol Roger, and he was always, I don't know if he was known as a wine connoisseur, but he was never mistaking. He was always picking the best vintages. So it started with 1895, but it has been 14, 21, 28, 34, 37, 47. But the relationship with Pol Roger did really start after the war in 1945, when he was not in office anymore, and he came at a reception, a dinner or a lunch at the residence of the French ambassador, his very good friend Dove Cooper in Paris. And a very good friend of Dove Cooper as well was Odette Pol Roger, the wife of Jacques Pol Roger, the third generation of the family. And Sir Winston was Odette Pol Roger was seated next to him. And from that time started very strong friendship between the two families. Odette Pol Roger and Pol Roger has been sending a case of his favorite 1928 vintage for Christmas to him. He was writing, he always said that he will come to crush the grapes with his bare feet in Épernay. He never did. He never came. But he was writing to Odette Pol Roger, 44 Avenue de Champagne, the world most drinkable address, Épernay, France. He did name one of his racing horse Pol Roger, one of his fillies. And there is in the salon, in the British salon at Pol Roger, a telegram from him in 1953, which was after one of the coronation stakes. And he said, Pol Roger won splendidly today, so there is a little bit of profit on both races for you. Best love, Winston. So that's a piece. He has been writing, he has been betting on horses on behalf of Odette. And Odette Pol Roger was intriguing him. She was a fly fisher. She was shooting wild boar. She was mondaine. She was the face of Pol Roger after the war. And at such a point that when he passed in 1965, the Maison has been putting a black border on the edge of the labels of the vintages shipped to the UK. And that has been for quite a few years. In 1975, they have been asking to the Churchill family if they would be okay with a cuvée with his name as a tribute cuvée more than a prestige cuvée. And the idea was to reproduce a vintage, a champagne, would have loved if he was still alive. That was the idea. It has been bottled in Magnum only, so 1975. And the idea as well was to use the cru which were used or coming from vineyards which were under the appellation at that time. And it was Grand Cru. And it was Grand Cru from the Montagne de Reims. And it was predominantly Pinot Noir, some Chardonnay, only Grand Cru. And we kept going, doing that. And today we have the 2015 vintage, which is the 21st vintage or expression of the cuvée. It was launched in 1984, 40 years after D-Day, at Blenheim Palace, the palace of the Duke of Marlborough, where he was born. And it has been a claim, and it may have been at that time Tom Stevenson in 1984 saying that it was the most amazing prestige cuvée of the modern times. I mean, it was a blessing from the critics, and it was not meant to be a cuvée for all around the world. It was for the UK, and it was a limited edition, and it became an habit. I mean, we have been redoing it. Each new cuvée is presented to each first bottle or first magnum of the cuvée is presented to the family to get the blessing of the family. So, and since I took over as CEO of Pol Roger, I am going in London. We have a jolly lunch with members of the family. It could be Lord Soames, his grandson, Randolph Churchill, his great-grandson. It has been Celia Sands, his granddaughter. It has been Jenny Churchill, his great-granddaughter. And once they give the blessing, I mean, it would be a problem if they do not give the blessing because...
I don't think that's possible.
No, I think that's not possible. But and after 75, we had 79, 82, 85, 86, 88, 90, 93, 95, 96. So that's 10, 98, 99, 2000, 2002, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. That's 20 and 15.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks ago, the headquarters of Pol Roger are now named 1 and 3 Rue Winston Churchill. And we had, for the first time, great delegation from the Churchill family who came to unveil statue we have been putting in front of our new site.
I saw that in the media. Yes.
And this statue is representing Sir Winston Churchill painting a famous picture called The Bottle Escape, which were empty bottles. And there are 2 bottles or 1 Magnum and 1 bottle of Pol Roger in this picture. And it's a life-size statue. I mean, we are not, Pol Roger is not open to the public, to the general public, or we are welcoming quite a lot of visitors on appointment, as you know. But it's now the unique thing as well at Pol Roger is that we have everything in one site. And it was great to have the Churchill family. We had some members from the Royal Scots Dragon Guard, from the army, with a big link with Pol Roger. We had with a mini band of pipers and drummers. Everybody was in mess kit and in black tie. Yeah. The ambassador of the UK in France, she was here. And
it's a big moment.
It was
another historical moment.
And it was as well for us an important moment because that was the inauguration of an exhibition we do for the 175 years of Pol Roger. It was the end of 4 years of construction of our new production site. So it was great.
Yeah, very important moment. It's nice to have them there, the family there as part of that. Sir Winston Churchill is your only prestige cuvée right now, but it did have a predecessor. I wanted to touch on that because there's little known about it. People really don't speak about it now. The PR Reserve Spécial was discontinued in 1988, about 12 years after the first Sir Winston vintage. So my understanding is that it was Chardonnay dominant, so quite the opposite of Sir Winston Churchill being Pinot dominant. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that champagne because there's a little bit of a mystery around it. There's not a lot said. Why did you discontinue it? And why was it Chardonnay dominant?
I think it was, I am not sure, but I think it was 50-50, Pinot and Chardonnay.
Yeah.
It was indeed meant to be a prestige cuvée, and it was the best sourcing of Pinot Noir and the best sourcing of Chardonnay. And it was named PR. I mean, with a very modern packaging at the time, which was a kind of transparent label with the two letters PR. And it was discontinued because at some point, the cuvée Sir Winston Churchill was not meant to be a prestige cuvée, but it became a prestige cuvée.
Yeah.
Because it attracting the spotlights and then the cuvée PR, as far as Christian, I heard the story from Christian de Billy and Champagne Pol Roger, and I think at some point they didn't know exactly, and consumer didn't know exactly where to position it. Maybe we should resume this cuvée at some point, but Paul the Maison has a very limited range so far, with 3 non-vintage and 4 vintages, and including the cuvée Sir Winston Churchill. And I think we wanted to keep it limited, and it was discontinued a few years after the release of the cuvée. And I think the cuvée Sir Winston Churchill was a limited, very limited cuvée at the beginning, and then we have been. It was a lot of demand for the cuvée, and we have been increasing the size of the cuvée. And if you increase the size of the cuvée, it means that you
have to take from somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, always we make sure that we can make the non-vintage, but we need as well, we are a big producer of vintage. I mean, Pol Roger has
big focus on the vintage.
Big focus on the vintage. And you have the Blanc de Blanc, which is only Grand Cru, and this cuvée were quite recent. The Blanc de Blanc was a recent cuvée for, and it was a favorite as well from Champagne Pol Roger. He was calling it our liquid diamond.
Yeah. Well, we'll get onto the Blanc de Blanc soon, but I think, we've started to touch on, I guess, opportunities to increase your volume and things like that. And there's a lot of decisions that have to go into it. So over several decades, you've invested very consistently and heavily in new and improved facilities, as you've already mentioned. But you've always remained adamant when asked about expanding that, you take a more conservative approach. Your focus really is on quality first before volume. And I just want to know, with demand so high, obviously demand has come off champagne in recent times, but it has been really at a peak over the last few years, and it will pick up eventually as well. Clearly you have pressure from your international partners for more and more allocation. So what is the thinking behind resisting the pressure to increase your production? You own roughly half of, the estate required to go into your production. You source from very strategic and long-term suppliers who produce very good quality fruit for you. So there's obviously an opportunity to negotiate more contracts. So why not go down that path?
I think we have not been, we always said that we didn't want to grow too much, but we have been growing in the last 10, 15 years. And we have been growing because we have been able to secure some new sourcing. And it was the only possibility for us to grow without making compromise, as I said before, on the level of quality of the Brut non-vintage, of the Brut Reserve, of the white foil. So if we have been able to source more Chardonnay from Grand Cru, more Pinot Noir, we have been able to grow our production of vintage, of Blanc de Blanc, of Churchill, and of Brut Reserve as well, because the year we have no vintage, for example, 2023 was not great as a year for champagne, but there were some very nice Chardonnay, and we could have decided to make a vintage Blanc de Blanc. But if you do a vintage Blanc de Blanc you take off some reserve or some potential for the non-vintage or some backup for the reserve. So we have been growing a little bit, but you have to anticipate that a long time in advance, because when you release non-vintage after 36 to 48 months, when you release vintage after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, if you release something today, you have to think quite a few years in advance to do it. And the last few years have been indeed quite important. They have been extremely good for Champagne. I think we talk about the post-COVID years. I think it has been good as well for the people who have been developing their sales. For Pol Roger, it has been a continuous growth in the last 15 years. And I mean, even 2023, which has been a year where the sales of Champagne have been down already, Pol Roger has been stable. In 2020, the year of the COVID, it was quite a tough year for Champagne, and we have been selling the same number of bottles as in 2019, which was a very good year for Champagne. And this year, if it's going to be a bit shaky and if we are going to sell less, it will mean that we could brace a little bit. And as you said, there are cycles and it will come back. At the moment, I mean, the price of Champagne has been growing, has been up quite a lot. The price of grape has been up quite a lot, and everything has been up. And at the same time, interest rates have been up as well. And so quite a few people have maybe not the same possibility to invest in. And the restaurants are probably selling less when retailers are still doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess. But it just seems, I guess, you're very fortunate in that where you're positioned in the market, you're very much at the premium level of the champagne category. And so I guess you don't feel the hits as much as some of the others do who like to really trade on volume, who really depend on that. So Pol Roger is known for being a house of great vintage champagne, as you touched on before, making some of the most collectible and age-worthy champagnes available. What determines a good year for the Pol Roger style? Because you don't make a vintage all the time. What are some of the characteristics of the year required to make it exceptional?
I think that this is the magic of Champagne is, and in that perspective, we have now much more capacity possibility with the winemaking facilities. We have been investing a lot in more smaller tanks to be able to separate as much as possible our sourcing. I mean, it means more complex choices to do when we do the blending, but we have more possibilities. And the more diversity and the more possibilities we have are helping us to make the most consistent non-vintage. The non-vintage is around a third each of the Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier and Chardonnay. We have, our sourcing are not changing too much. But the magic and the great thing with Champagne is as well the capacity we have to use reserve wines. I mean, some houses may use much more reserve wine, and that will be giving as well touch to the style of the Maison. I mean, there are some famous and very good Champagne with more reserve, thinking about Krug or thinking about Charlottic. Pol Roger has an average of 25% reserve, which is, it could be up to 30, it could be as low as 20, but that will vary. In fact, we like as well the normal years when the wine, I mean, the still wines are not too powerful and big. And I mean, 20, sometime, yes, sometime like, I mean, some years like 29, I look forward to seeing the 19 vintage. I think it's going to be an amazing big vintage.
It's looking beautiful right now.
And each time we taste some still wine, some reserve wines from 2019, we are amazed about the level of the quality.
Elegant, very elegant wine. So what about the vintages? Because this is where a big part of your focus is. It's on creating age-worthy, beautiful, elegant vintage champagnes. So what sort of year would make it a really great vintage year for Pol Roger?
The year when I am doing all the harvest in my car, going from one press house to the other, eating the grapes. I mean, when you can eat the grapes and they taste already good, when you can eat the pépins, the seeds, and you feel the maturity and you feel the balance. Sometimes you do not see that at the harvest. And there are some amazing vintages maybe 2013, 2016, 98. There are these vintage we have a revelation afterward. We know that there is a potential when we taste the still wines, but we do not have directly the feeling at the harvest that it could make a great vintage. And in fact, 2016, for example, we have not bottled the Churchill. And I think it is probably one of the reasons we have an amazing vintage 16, but we didn't have the feeling that we could really have the quintessence to produce Churchill. I think a vintage, we don't need to produce a vintage every year. We have been fortunate in Champagne the last 20 years because we have been able to produce quite a few vintages. If we do not feel it, I think we like to do a vintage when it's a good year for Chardonnay, for Pinot Noir, and for Pinot Meunier, because for the non-vintage, we need to have our Pinot Meunier at the top. And we have been sourcing in the last few years, we have been starting to source Pinot from the Aube. And we think it's a very good addition. I mean, it's a very good addition. It's giving us as well some resources as far as Pinot Noir is concerned for our Brut reserve. And it means as well that we have limited resources in Montagne de Reims. It's difficult to get more. I mean, if we get more contract, it means that we steal the contract from somebody else. Of course. And most of the Maisons are not changing. And if they lose or if they stop it may be as well for some quality reasons. So I think at the moment, Champagne is selling its entire production. 34,000 hectares are planted. And we will see, because if the economy is becoming a little difficult, it may be possible that some newcomers are not going to be very comfortable. We have been, it's a renewal of contracts this year, and we have been able to have more contracts with some very nice sourcing. So, but that won't be before 5, 6, 7 years that we will see that in the production of Pol Roger.
Okay, so we might be seeing a little bit more coming to our markets, which is a good thing. We'll see. I would like to talk through the Blanc de Blanc. I mentioned to you before we started the interview that for me, this Blanc de Blanc is such a standout every time. It's another level of elegance, and the texture is absolutely superb. And I know a lot of wine connoisseurs love this Blanc de Blanc. So I want to talk through that because it's probably, it's a relatively new vintage that's come to your portfolio. And I would like you to maybe talk us through what goes into the thinking. Why is it so beautiful? Because it really has a beauty to this champagne.
It is a Blanc de Blanc d'assemblage. We do not write on the labels that it's Grand Cru, but we are using, it is what I call the champagne equation. If you do 1 + 1, it's not 2, it's 3. 1 + 1 + 1, it's 5. 1 + 1 + 1, it's 7. And if you have some Wary, Chouilly, Cramant, Avis, Auger, Le Mesnil-sur-Auger, when you were mentioning earlier as well that you can feel the level, I think as I said, Christian Pol Roger was calling it his liquid diamond, and it is a great wine. It is made from the best. If you go in a fish market, and if you are a 3 macaron Michelin chef, you go only to source the best of the best. And it has to be like that. And as we have been investing a lot as well in a lot of new, smaller tanks, we continue to have the same recipe of the double settling at cold temperature, and that was brought in by James Coffinet a long time ago when he came from Bilcar to Pol Roger. Dominique Petit, who came from Krug to Pol Roger, he spent 20 years at Krug, 20 years at Pol Roger. He has not been bringing the Krug style at Pol Roger, but he has been probably bringing the Krug preciseness to Pol Roger without the same process of winemaking. And Damien Cambre, our chef de cave today, is bringing as well his own skills. And if you have a lot of small tanks, if you have 2 lots of Le Mesnil-sur-Auger, you never have a lot because it's rare. But if you have 4 tons, one exposure, 4 tons, another exposure, in the old days, we used to pre-blend them at the harvest time. Now we vinify separately in a 25 hectoliter tank, and we may not use it, or we may use one or with a Churchill and one with the Blanc de Blanc. And if you have more opportunities, more diversity, you can add complexity to your blend, but you add finesse as well. And the complexity on the long run is going to end up, and we use only cuvée. The first pressing. It's so important to have the first pressing. We may use some second pressing of Chardonnay in the Brut Reserve, but for the Pinot Noir and the Pinot Meunier and the Chardonnay coming in the vintage, the Blanc de Blanc and the Churchill, we use only the first press. And it has to be like that. Mm. We can make more if we use if we extract a lot, but we will lose quality. Mm. So it is indeed a beautiful cuvée, the Blanc de Blanc, and it was started with a 59 or 61 vintage, but so it's very recent and in the history of Pol Roger. But we have, and we are not producing a lot. It's not a big cuvée, and we allocate, as all our other wines, we allocate in proportion the same volume to each market. Mm. Yeah. So we do not have one market for Blanc de Blanc, one market. We try to have the same balance in each country.
Yeah, to have that representation. So Pol Roger really stays true to its heritage, but also at the same time, you're not really tempted to sort of go off and make these one-off cuvées and special releases. So many Maisons are doing those sorts of experiments and just, trying to create a bit more interest in their Maison by doing some special releases. And, you've got this very consistent, very classical range of champagnes in your portfolio. What is your thinking around this? Have you ever been tempted to do some of those, more experimental cuvées, I guess? You mentioned to me before, this is obviously a special year for you. It's marking your 175th anniversary. You do have something special coming out to market. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. But also, why isn't Pol tempted to do some of these, yearly one-off releases, perhaps?
We have been. So in fact, Blanc de Blanc at some point was a new release. Rosé. The Rosé vintage. We do not produce any non-vintage Rosé. There are some other. I think Roger is not producing a non-vintage Rosé, but they have a vintage Rosé. Rosé was a new wine at the end of the 50s, and it was not considered as really prestige to make a rosé. Rosé was not a good reputation in Champagne. That was more the wine for... and when Maurice Pol Roger was having his grandson Christian de Billy after his first trip in Central America, coming back with a boat, telling him, everybody wants some rosé, etc. And his grandfather was furious. But his grandson was so stubborn that at the end he said, okay, do one rosé if you want, but you have to promise that you will not force me to drink it. And that was an experimentation. Yes. And we are producing rosé, and we are allocating a vintage rosé every year. And I think we are not known for our rosé, but it's a little part of our production. And in the year 2000, mid-year 2000, we did launch Pure, and Pure is a Brut Nature. We did it at a time. It was a challenge from some journalists who were saying, you produce such a nice non-vintage, why don't you produce a naked version of your non-vintage? But it didn't work. The white foil without any dosage was not a good Brut Nature. And we have been adjusting at some point. I think the chef de cave was Dominique Petit at the time. He was not willing to add too many things in the cellar. And Dominique, we did suspect him of doing some sabotage, but he was not. He was doing the white foil without dosage, and it was not giving a good result. So at the end, when he knew that Hubert de Billy wanted really to have a no dosage, a no dosé, he has been working on the adjustment, and he has been proposing us some options, taking off some cru with too much acidity, bringing in some cru with more floral aromas, and still with the 1/3 each of the Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. maybe with different time onlys to achieve the right balance. And I think now we have a beautiful no dosage, but look at how many producers have been launching Brut Nature and no dosé. And after a few years, they realized it was not working and they took it off. And now with the 175th anniversary of Pol Roger, we have been welcoming guests at the winery so many times. And we had a little library, a little vinothèque that we were keeping for us to drink or for us to propose when our guests were coming. But we had not enough. And anytime we were proposing some, we had question about, but are you selling some? Can we get some back vintage? And there is an appetite for older champagne. I mean, and this is worldwide. It's a new thing. I mean, you have people discover the mature champagne, but there are a lot of people who are interested in vintage champagne with some age.
Yes.
And we have decided in the last 15 years to not allocate all our vintage, all our Blanc de Blanc, all our Rosé vintage, all our Churchill, but to keep some more in our cellars. And we have the pretension to think that the best cellars to age Pol Roger are the Pol Roger cellars. And we are going to release every year now Vinothèque range, which is not a recent disgorgement, it's historical disgorgement.
Right, original disgorgement, wow.
And we start with Churchill 98 and 99 bottles and some magnums. We start with Brut Vintage 2000 and 2002 bottles and some magnums, Blanc de Blanc 2000 and Rosé 99. We have no more Rosé after because we didn't keep
it aside.
No. And next year we will release an allocation of Brut Vintage 04, Blanc de Blanc 2002, Churchill 2000, and the year after we will release Brut Vintage 06, Blanc de Blanc 04, and Churchill 2002.
So this will be an annual thing.
Yes.
Every year from now on, you will be releasing something new. Wow,
yes.
That's really special.
So it will be as well. I mean, it's not big volumes.
No.
It's beautiful presentation because as we are very lazy, we have been influenced by the old label at Pol Roger. And if you come at the tasting room at Pol Roger, you will see in the windows all the old label of the vintages at the time of Churchill. And we are doing the same. So we will put the date of disgorgement initial. We will put the year of release X, the cellar of Pol Roger. And some people may still have some old vintages they purchased at the time, but we think these are going to be, I mean, they are amazing. And if you, next time you're in Champagne, if you want to taste the full range.
I won't say no.
No, but we cannot propose it to everybody, but I think the wines are amazing. We had a Ordre des Coteaux dinner in Hong Kong for Vinexpo, before Vinexpo months ago. And we did propose Vinothèque 02 in Magnum for the dinner. And it was great because we had a table of 10, but I think we had the impression that we were inviting the 380 people who were in the room. And the wine was really amazing. So we think this is going to help us without a growth in terms of volume, but we can create value as well. We can create value to continue to maybe attract some growers who see the spotlights on Pol Roger and could be proud to be part of that.
Absolutely.
And that's really something.
And really reinforcing the message of Pol Roger being a champagne that is magical in that it is designed to age. It just ages almost endlessly. So it's fantastic. So just in wrapping up, because we're getting to the end of things now, you're in Australia, obviously as part of a national tour with your importers, you're meeting members of trade, but also champagne lovers. How important is Australia to Pol Roger?
Australia is a very important market to Pol Roger, and I think Pol Roger has been one of the few houses to travel very early in this market. Christian Pol Roger, I was fortunate to grab the baton from Christian when he retired in 2006, and he has been 42 years the face of Pol Roger on the export market. And as early as the 70s, Christian was already waving the flag in that part of the world, in Australia and New Zealand. And he has been seeing a lot of, he has been, I think, receiving any single winner of the Vin de Champagne Award.
Yeah.
And when we talk about all these ambassadors have been doing a lot for champagne in Australia. And since 2004, we have one of the best partner in Australia. And, Samuel Smith and Negociant are two distributing companies belonging to Yalumba and to the Hill Smith family. And funny enough, Yalumba was started in 1849. So the same year Pol Roger was started. And in the last 20 years, the sales team and, all at Negociant and Samuel Smith have been doing a fantastic job for Pol Roger. I think they have been putting Pol Roger Pol Roger has been meeting its consumers. And I think the brand, for us, it's an important market. It's part of its top 5 of our markets. We talk about UK, France, US, Sweden, Australia. That's important market for Pol Roger. And Australia and the white foil is part of the furniture in Australia. And it's a market where we love to, it's a bit far away, but but we are always very welcome in the country, and we have a lot of visitors coming from Australia.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of champagne lovers here in Australia who mention Pol whenever I speak to people and I talk to them about some of their favourite champagnes. Pol Roger is always one of those brands that comes up. I think that there's a nice sentimental feeling toward the Maison, but also people just love the expression because I think the purity and the freshness really is very suitable to us here in Australia, being obviously a warmer climate. It's always one of those champagnes you bring out at Christmas time and celebratory occasions around the summer season because it just goes with so many different things, so many different food and festive moments here in Australia. So it is
the best champagne to have a white Christmas.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, look, Laurent, I just want to thank you so much for your time, and we're very happy to have you here in Australia. It's always great to get a little bit deeper into the story of the Maisons with people who make the decisions like you. So I would like to wish you all the very best on the rest of your Australian trip.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Vine & Bubble is a boutique and independent information source dedicated exclusively to telling the real story of champagne. It was launched by me, Sarah Underdown, in November 2018 after almost a decade of working in the champagne industry as a recognised writer, educator and presenter. Vine & Bubble brings together a network of Australian wine journalists, sommeliers, educators and industry representatives as regular contributors. As a team of champagne lovers and communicators, we are thrilled to share our united passion with wine-loving audiences. To read more about champagne, to subscribe to events in Australia and learn more about opportunities to join us for experiences in champagne, visit vineandbubble.com and register your details.